This is Bible teacher Nelson Walters. Today we're talking about the Assyrian, the one who invades Israel in the last days and Jesus himself defeats. That's from Micah 5. The Assyrian, the one who will be killed by a sword, held not by human hands. That's Isaiah 31. Wow, sure sounds like the Antichrist, and we believe he is, but he's more than just the human Antichrist. Just as the beast in Revelation 13 and 17 seems to have a demonic, fallen angel component to him, the beast comes out of the bottomless pit after all, so the Assyrian too is both man and at least possessed by a fallen angel. We learn about the Assyrian in Ezekiel in a very unusual passage that obviously isn't talking about a human being, and today we're going to explore all the aspects of this, when this fallen angel was on earth, who he was, and what his future is. And today, we're going to begin with Ezekiel chapter 31, a very interesting chapter, sort of like Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, chapters that start out being addressed to human kings, and then seem to morph into chapters that are addressed to spiritual beings. Now, you're probably aware of Isaiah 14, where the name Lucifer entered the English language. How you have fallen from heaven, you star of the morning, son of the dawn, who have been cut down to the earth, you who defeated the nations, Isaiah 14:12. Although this passage starts out being addressed to the king of Babylon, nearly all Bible scholars believe it morphs into a discussion about a fallen angel, possibly even Satan. You may be familiar with Ezekiel 28 also, which starts out as a conversation with the king of Tyre, which is in modern-day Lebanon, by the way, but then morphs into a discussion with a spiritual being that most scholars also believe could be Satan. You had the seal of perfection, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. You are in Eden, the garden of God. Well, obviously from that, this isn't a human being. No person living in the days of Ezekiel was in the Garden of Eden to be addressed in that way. It had to be an angel of some kind. So Ezekiel 31 is one of those passages, just like those two. It begins being addressed to an earthly king, the Pharaoh of Egypt, but shifts and begins to refer to this being known as the Assyrian. Now let's stop right there. How crazy is that? Calling an Egyptian an Assyrian. That makes no sense unless they are two different characters. Two in one, maybe. One, the earthly king, one, the demonic angel. And on closer examination, we can see this is definitely not a normal human being either in this chapter. And it's important because the Assyrian is a title, as we said, that appears in the end times, in Micah and Isaiah. So before we dig into this Assyrian character further, I want to address why I think these three passages refer first to an earthly king and then switch to a demonic figure. I think in all these cases, the earthly king being referred to was influenced by or possessed by the demonic fallen angel figure. In a similar way, perhaps the Antichrist will be possessed in that same way in the future. So God addresses both the human and the demon in the same passage. By speaking to the king, he's speaking to the demonic angel as well. So understanding this, let's look at Ezekiel 31, the passage which is rarely taught, but has great end-time significance since it's talking to the specific fallen angel who possesses the Antichrist and whom Jesus defeats. In this case, we learn the Assyrian also possessed or influenced the Pharaoh of Egypt. That is very interesting. If this refers to the Pharaoh of the Exodus, that would have been 900 years earlier than Ezekiel's day. Or maybe it's referring to someone in Ezekiel's day or a Pharaoh that is another name for the coming Antichrist. And Ezekiel's just calling him Pharaoh. It really isn't clear, and I'm not taking a position on that. But let's start looking at this passage in Ezekiel 31:2. Speak unto Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to his hordes. Whom are you like in greatness? Behold the Assyrian, a cedar in Lebanon, with beautiful branches and forest shade, and very high, and its top was among the clouds. This is what we're talking about. The passage seems to shift from this Pharaoh mid-sentence to the Assyrian, and that's strange. It then describes the Assyrian using some kind of metaphorical language as him being a cedar of Lebanon, which sounds tall and strong, doesn't it? And I guess that could be a human, right? Well, let's keep looking at what else it says about this Assyrian. No tree in God's garden could compare with it in beauty. I made it beautiful with the multitude of its branches, and all the trees of Eden, which were in the garden of God, were jealous of it. Ezekiel 31, 8-9. Now this is very similar to the passage about the king of Tyre, where God addresses a being who was in the Garden of Eden. And here, the trees of the garden were all jealous of this tree. How was that if this tree wasn't there itself? So obviously, this is more than a human being referred to and more than a human empire. In fact, Ezekiel chapter 31 makes more references to the Garden of Eden than any other chapter in the Bible, including the early chapters of Genesis. Let me state that again. More references to the Garden of Eden in Ezekiel 31, even than in Genesis. So, who are these trees that were in the garden along with the Assyrian? It appears to me that these trees were a symbol of divine, angelic creatures. Tree could also be a symbol of a kingdom now. The fig tree is symbolic of the wicked in Israel. The olive tree is symbolic of God's righteous. Luke 21, in the fig tree parable, in that chapter, refers to the fig tree sprouting leaves and all the trees. So there are many empires who are symbolically trees, but they weren't in the Garden of Eden, were they, 6,000 years ago? But angelic beings were. Are angelic beings associated with empires? If so, that explains it, and we believe they are. In fact, from the book of Daniel, chapter 10, we see fallen angel beings clearly associated with empires. The archangel Michael is called the prince of Daniel's people, Israel. There's also a prince of Persia and a prince of Greece. And since they hold up or delay God's messenger angel, it's pretty obvious they're fallen angels themselves. Human princes could never stop God's angels. In the Exodus account, God not only judged the nation, Pharaoh, and the Egyptian armies, but it also said God judged their gods, and that he was directly punishing the fallen angels and demons who were associated with the ancient Egyptians, that the ancient Egyptians worshipped. Another example of fallen angels called gods here being associated with an empire. This, of course, makes sense. It appears God has assigned an angel to each of the nations. In Deuteronomy 32:8, we read, "When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples," that is their national borders, "according to the number of the sons of God." Sons of God being a term for angels, after all. So at the Tower of Babel, when God divided the nations, he assigned the people groups to an individual son of God or angel. And the Assyrian appears to have had that type of authority, same authority as these angels referred to in Deuteronomy. And probably he had authority over other fallen angels as well. In Ezekiel 31:5 it says, "So it towered high above all the trees of the field." So it appears it was a leader angel, but it was cast out. Let's see what it says just a few verses later in Ezekiel 31:11 and 14. "I will give it into the hand of a mighty one of the nations. He shall surely deal with it as its wickedness deserves. I have cast it out. For they are all given over to death, to the world below, among the children of men, with those who go down to the pit. Again, it's contrasted with the children of men, so it's not a man, and it's sent to the pit, cast there by a mighty one, possibly Michael the archangel. And just a few verses later, we see that all the cedars of Lebanon were sent to Sheol by God. Now, what does that sound like to you? This certainly sounds like the punishment of the angels that sinned before the flood, doesn't it? So, was the Assyrian the leader of that group of fallen angels? Well, it seems like he could be. And as we pointed out, he was referred to in the past tense. We know in Revelation 17:8 that the beast is referred to by John in a similar way. The beast that you saw was, and is not, and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. Is this the Assyrian? Well, it certainly could be. So our theory is the Assyrian is one of the fallen angels who descended to the earth in pre-flood world. According to the book of Enoch, their leader was Sami Azaz, and the most infamous one of the angels that fell was Azazel. Notice both have that word Azaz in their name. So, why is this guy called the Assyrian? The chief of demons in the ancient Assyria was Pa-Zuzu, famous for being the demon in the movie The Exorcist, if you saw that back, 40 years ago. The repeating ZZ syllables in all three names are similar to the Azaz, A-Z-A-Z, which means hairy goat or goat demon. Are these all names for the Assyrian? Well, they could be. Sami Azaz's name means the hairy goat who watches from heaven. A perfect name for someone who was a watcher. Azazel means hairy goat god. Both are in the bottomless pit right now. And we know the fallen angel component of the beast comes up out of the bottomless pit. Here's an account of the judgment of Sami Azaz from the book of Enoch. And the Lord said unto Michael, Go bind Sami Azaz and his associates who have united themselves with women, so as to have defiled themselves with them in all their uncleanness. And when their sons have slain one another, and he's talking there about the Nephilim, and they have seen the destruction of their beloved ones, again, the Nephilim, bind them fast for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth, till the day of their judgment and of their consummation, till the judgment that is forever and ever is consumed in those days. They shall be led off to the abyss of fire, and to the torment and the prison in which they shall be confined forever. And whoever shall be condemned and destroyed will from henceforth be bound together with them to the end of all generations. 1 Enoch 10:11-14. Azazel was one of the other angels, as we said, who left his place of dominion in the days of Noah and was confined to the bottomless pit for cohabiting with human women and for sharing forbidden knowledge. On the Day of Atonement, and this is very interesting, the scapegoat had the sins of a nation transferred to it, and it was thrown over a cliff and said to go to Azazel. In other words, sending the sin back to its original source. Azazel must be a very prominent fallen angel to be featured on the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur. Now, I prefer the idea that Sami Azaz is the Assyrian, but it could be Azazel. And this title, the Assyrian, implies the seat of their power in the pre-flood era was in the region near where Assyria was. Now that's the past. Let's look at the Assyrian in the future. Micah chapter 5. This is the most famous chapter that is read every Christmas about Jesus coming from Bethlehem. But the passage continues well beyond Jesus' birth, all the way to his second coming. Here's the second coming part. And they, Israel, shall dwell securely, for now he, Jesus, is great to the ends of the earth, and he shall be their peace when the Assyrian comes into our land and treads on our palaces. Then we will raise against him 7 shepherds and 8 princes of men. They shall shepherd the land of Assyria with the sword from the land of Nimrod at its entrances. And he shall deliver us from the Assyrian when he comes into our land and treads within our borders. Micah 5:5-6. This is speaking of the end times, when the Assyrian is back from the bottomless pit, and Jesus is there to defeat him. Now, an interesting and probably controversial point that I'd like to suggest is that Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, the other passages in the Bible about human kings and demonic beings, they may not be referring to Satan at all, but to this same being, the Assyrian. Remember, the devil never went to hell. The devil can still access heaven. In Job chapter 1, God said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" And the devil said that he came from going to and fro on the earth, so he wasn't in the bottomless pit. Yet the beings in these chapters, Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, were sent to the abyss. This exactly mirrors Ezekiel 31, who we know by name is the Assyrian. Also, in Isaiah 14, we read about the cedars of Lebanon, rejoicing when this being is sent to the abyss. In Ezekiel 28, the being in question was in the garden of God, just like the Assyrian, and was proud because of its great beauty, just like the Assyrian. Now, these are all unusual chapters, and I'm not saying that Isaiah 14, which is probably a favorite chapter of yours, has to be the Assyrian. These chapters are difficult to understand, but they could be talking about this being the Assyrian and not Satan. Keep that in mind. And if this is true, the Isaiah 14 passage gives us a glimpse into who this was back in ancient history. Click right here to keep watching and discover that name hidden in this chapter and who he was in ancient mythology. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.